Welcome to Homa Studio's quick introduction to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This video will just focus on the HTML, which is Hypertext Markup Language. If you want to learn any more about HTML, I would recommend going to W3 Schools. It's a great resource. They have little try it windows, and I use it all the time for many types of content areas. But if you go to HTML first, they have a tutorial, they have little tryout windows. And if you forget some things, you could go here and check it out. One thing I just want to point out real quick is HTML elements we'll talk about. And elements are the parts of HTML. It's just like putting together a document in Word. You would have headings, you would have subheadings, you might have lists, you might have paragraphs, you might put images on there. They're all the elements on a Word document, and we're going to put the elements on a web page, which are H1s, which are headings, Ps, which are paragraphs. We'll have ULs, which are unordered lists. We'll have ordered lists, which would be with like numbers and letters and things like that, and images. So those are the elements, and all elements typically have an opening and a closing tag to tell you where they start and where they end. Now there are some tags that are kind of self-closing, but I just wanted to point that out. And also there's something called attributes, where they could be involved inside the element, and a lot of times they'll have an equal sign and a quote. Well, they'll have an equal sign and a quote to show you the attribute, which this is the ref attribute, the hyperlink reference, and this is the value, which is where it's going to. That's a link. So we'll talk about all that. Here's an image. Source is the attribute, and then the value is actually the file name of the image. And we'll talk about all that, but if you forget any of that or you need to know anything about HTML, CSS, JavaScript, SQL, Python, all kinds of stuff, W3 Schools is a great resource. I use it all the time for my students. So let's get back to Replit, and I'll close this up right now. Now, Replit is a great IDE, an integrated development environment, and you could do Python, you can do all kinds of stuff in here. We're going to do web development in here, and I'm going to log in, and I already have a video on creating an account, so I'm just going to log in. And by the way, I'm in dark mode right now. They make it really easy to change from dark mode or light mode down here. This is light mode, and if you click on the moon, that's dark mode. I'll stay in dark mode for now. And what I'll do is I'll create a new repel. They call them repels in Replit. I always pronounce things wrong because you don't hear people saying it a lot unless you watch a video. And sometimes I don't even say them correctly, so I might say, I said repellet for years, but it's actually Replit. So I'm going to go to create up here, and I'll create a new repel, and I'll make sure it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I'll type in HTML just to search, and you'll see this come up here, and you'll have a window that'll put kind of a randomly generated name here, and I'm just going to put my first web page, just something real basic. My first web page right now. Now you can create a site in here and put lots of subfolders, or you could just make a page right now. So since we're just starting from the beginning, we'll just do this little exercise with my first page, and it'll just be a page, and we'll just have our index page, we'll have our CSS, and then maybe we'll add JavaScript to it. And then I'll just hit create repel. And here it is, and it gives you some generated HTML. Now we can get rid of this if we want to and create our own, but it gives us a little head start here, and this is the root HTML page. So if you run this, you'll see whatever the root page is. So if you create subfolders, if you hit run, you're not going to see the pages in there. You'll have to make links to them, which we'll do eventually. We'll create a structure here. So we can make a site, but this is just really just a page. And these are the external files that you can link to so that the JavaScript, the CSS, the styles are kept separate, so you don't put all the details in here and make it harder to go through the HTML. And remember, the HTML is really just the structure and the content. And what I like to do is go over here to this button that says open in a new tab, and I'll click on this. And so it says hello world. That's just a little JavaScript thing. And what we'll do is we'll continually refresh this as we make changes. So we'll keep these two tabs open, our coding window and our preview window. And you might say, well, what are you going to do here? Well, I'm not even going to use this. We're not going to use the console right now, and I'm not going to use the preview window right now. So I'm just going to hover over this and move it over so we have more room for coding. And that's the way I like to work. So whenever we make changes, we'll just go here and hit refresh. Now, right now they have a link to JavaScript. I don't want this, so I'm going to get rid of this. And I don't need this hello world in here. And the only thing I'm going to change right now, we have our doc type declaration. That's saying to use HTML5. And then we have our HTML tags, which starts up here and ends here. So everything's nested together. Now, typically this would be nested in, but it's on the same level. That's okay. What I like to do is go here to my settings and make sure that indent size is on 4 so that we have a nice big indent so you can see what's inside other things, or basically what the parent and child relationship is. So this is the settings over here, and you could close this up if you click on one of these, but I like to keep my files open, at least for now, so I see what I'm working on, especially as you're going from file to file. So I'm going to be just working in my home page, the default name, which is index.html right now. Now, what I'm going to do is actually highlight this stuff, and what's nice in Replit is you could just hit tab, and I want to make sure it's on this line, so I'm just going to move this stuff over. The default doesn't always follow what you have set up, so I'm just going to move these over. And I want to follow these so they stay on these little lines here. And when I go here and I put something in here, you can see it's going to follow that line. Let me backspace this up. And I want to keep a nice 4-space kind of indent here. Now what you're seeing in the head area here, the head element, is the character set, which means those are all the characters that you can use on a page, not just your alphabet, but the numbers and special characters. They're universal that are in here, and that's pretty standard. This viewport width, device width, that's for responsive, so that'll help pages render on phones. The title is what you're going to see up here. It just says Replit, and maybe I'll change that. I'll go up here to title, and I'll put my first web page. And we could keep the link to our CSS right now, even though we're not going to use it right now, but this will link to that file. So that's just saying where it is. And because they're loose here, they're not in a separate subfolder, you can just put style.css. If I had this in a folder, I'd have to put a / and put something else. So I'm going to keep this like this right now. So if I go here and I refresh the page, it gets rid of that hello world because I deleted that, but it changes the title. So that's the only thing we did so far. And I can see, oh, I probably want a capital P there, I guess, just to be consistent. And again, we're just going to do real quick stuff, so I won't take long to do this, but that's our head element. Notice there's an opening and closing tag, and this is the body element where you'll see all the visual content on the page. And we're just going to put structure and content. We're not going to style it. We're not going to make it look nice or anything right now. So we'll just put some real basic stuff in here. So after body, I'm going to hit enter, and I'll just put H1. Now, typically you'd put tags by using, the less than, greater than sign, putting H1, and then that, and then sometimes it'll auto correct and put the closing tag. We'll use something that's even easier. It's called Emmet, and it's built into Replit. And this way you could use shortcuts. You could just type H1 and then you hit your tab key. And watch this. There's my opening, closing H1 tags, and this is the H1 element. So the H1 element has opening and closing tags. And that means inside here I'm going to put a headline, and I'm just going to put my first web page again. I know this is real basic. My first web page. And then I'm going to put an H2, which is like a subheadline. So I'll just put H2 and I'll hit tab. And then I'll just put summer 2022, because that's where we are right now. And that's just a subheadline. And just to see what it looks like, I'll go here and I'll refresh it. And there's my headline and there's my subheadline. And by the way, to know how big these things are, if you go into your preferences in your browser, you'll see that 16 pixels typically is your default body size. Now, if I go in here, I'm just going to right click and do inspect, and you'll get this little inspect area down here. You might have used this before, you might have not. But if you go over here and click on this and just kind of click on things, you can click here and you'll see some of your CSS. That'll tell you your H1 is 2M. It's a block element, which means they're not meant to be side by side. They'll kind of stack, which is what they're doing right now. It's saying font weight bold. So we didn't do any of this. This is all by default. It's creating a block element. It's making it 2M, which would mean it's about 32 pixels. It's about double the default size. And this one, if I go into here, and I could go here and click on here. There's my H2. It's saying 1.5. So that's about 24 pixels. And it's also doing it bold by default. So that's all default stuff that HTML is doing. Because it was built for science, so headings would always be big and bold, subheadings would be not quite as big and bold, and so on. So this is an H1, this is an H2. You could keep going down to H6, but we probably do like H1 through H3. H1 is the biggest, H3 you'd use as a kind of a sub-headline, and after that, you wouldn't be using a whole lot of headlines after that. You'd be kind of styling it yourself. But I just want to point out that this is the inspect area that you kind of see what's being generated, what's being rendered. This is the HTML that's being generated and being rendered, and this is kind of the default styles that are in there that you haven't done anything with yet. And there is default space in here. I just want to point out too that there's default space. You can see there's default space on the web page itself going around a little bit. There's maybe 8 pixels going around the body. There's space above below this, below the first heading. If I go here, there's space above and below. So we're going to rewrite some of that, get rid of some of that eventually with our CSS. But right now, it's just our default, so we'll leave it there for now. So we'll just throw some default HTML in here, and I'll go back to my code, and I'll put a paragraph in here. Now, instead of typing a paragraph, I'm just going to put P and put tab. And there's my opening and closing P tags, and that means that's going to be a paragraph. And instead of typing a bunch of stuff in here, I'm just going to put lorem 30. That means I'm going to use lorem ipsum, which is basically placeholder text, and use about 30 words. And I'll type that, and I'll hit tab. And there it is. And then maybe I'll do another one. I'll hit return. I'll do P. Now, you can do a whole bunch of stuff at once, but I'm just doing this separately so you learn how to do it. So I'll do P tab. And that makes the opening closing tags. And then I'll do lorem 40. I'll make a bigger paragraph so they don't look exactly the same. And I'll hit tab. So we've got 2 paragraphs there. And I'll refresh it. And there are my 2 paragraphs. Now with HTML, it basically just feels like a container. So you see it's actually responsive right now because it basically wraps to the window that we're in. It doesn't look good. It's just basically very vanilla. But that's what we have. That's generic HTML for now. And just to put a couple other things in here, I'll put an unordered list, like a bullet list, and I'll put UL, and here's where I said you could do some of the children inside here. So if I do an unordered list, I'm going to put line items in here as well, or list items. I call them line items. Sometimes they're really called list items, I believe. So I'm going to use a greater than sign, and this will show something that's inside it, and I'm going to put list items, and I'll do 4 of them. So I'll put asterisk 4. So that means I'm going to make an unordered list with 4 list items. Now, it's already previewing what it's going to look like. So if I see that and that's what I want, that looks okay. Now, I could even put content in here if I wanted, but for now, I'll just hit my tab key because that makes it go. That generates the Emmet shortcut. So I'll hit tab. And if you ever have a problem, just backspace and try it again. So I'm going to make a little list here on things I like to do in the summer. And one is record home studio videos. And then I also like to run and work out. I like to do that in the summer. Well, all year long, but in the summer it's better when you don't have to put a whole bunch of hats and gloves and all that kind of stuff, at least where I am. And I'll put play with dogs. I have puppies now, so play with dogs. You probably hear them on videos this summer. And then I like to drink craft beer, but craft beer. So it's not just beer. I'm not just guzzling Bud Lights or anything like that. I'll drink craft beer, good beer. And that's what I like to do in the summer. I like to do that outside. It's nice to sit out and do that. So those are 4 things I like to do. So that's an unordered list. So that should just have bullets, meaning it's not ordered. Now you could change the type of bullet, but let's just take a look at it right now. And there we go. My first web page, summer 2022. And here's something here. Now I could have put a little, what I like to do in the summer or whatever, but I'm just putting a list right now. And maybe I'll put a picture of something summer related. So I'll go here and hit it return. And I'll type img, which is an image element, and I'll just hit tab. Now already it gives me the source attribute, which is asking for an image, and it gives me the alt attribute, which is asking for a description of the image. Now I'll put the description in there. I'll just put summer pic. And now I don't have an image in here. I could put an image here, or I could link to one online. And let me just go link to one online. I'll just put summer pic. And I'll search images, and I'll find a nice summer pic. And I'll look around. There's a nice one of a beach, nice kind of sunrise, sunset. I'm not sure which it is, but it looks more like a sunrise. I'll click on that. Now, here's the thing. This is 4,000 pixels. That's huge. Now, if I link to that, it's going to link to that online and link to that large image. Now, a couple things I could do. One is I could just link to it. So I'll show you this. If I just link to it, I could say copy image address. That way I don't have to download the image. I don't have to put it in Replit. I'll just say copy image address and go back to my code. And in here, I can paste it. Right in here, that's the attribute, the source attribute, src. And be careful not to put scr. Students, a lot of times I see scr, and that's where they make mistakes when something isn't showing up. I'll put that in there, and it's a long URL because it's from the web. And if I go to run this, well, I'm not going to run it. I'll just go here, and I'll refresh it. It's going to be gigantic. Okay, because it's 4,000 pixels. Now I could shorten that with CSS. I can make it smaller with CSS. I could also go and put another attribute in here and just put width and equals, because that's the way we use attributes. And then in quotes, I could put 400. I'll put 400. Now we don't put units when we put them in HTML, it knows that it's using pixels. Now notice I have to have a space here, I have to have a space here, I have to have quotes. If you miss a quote, it's going to screw things up. It's going to put an odd number of quotes, so make sure you have a quote around here. It does not matter if you have a space here and a space here around the equal sign, but it does matter if you have a space here. So you shouldn't have these things run together. You should have at least one space in between the previous attribute value and then the next attribute value. And here's the next attribute value. So there's the source attribute and the value is that URL. Here's the width, that's the attribute, the value is 400. And then there's the alt, which is basically what will display if the image doesn't load. And that's also good for text-to-speech software to use that as well. So people who can't see what's going on the page know that that's an image and not actual text. So it just describes so they're not missing anything like a button. And again, this closes up. So this image element does not have a closing tag. The way these have closing tags, this does not. It's self-closing. So an image element does not have a closing tag, just to point that out. And by putting that in there, now if we refresh this, we can make that 400 pixels. Now, the downside to this is our browser is resizing that. So we're still kind of linking to the large image and asking our browser to do that. It can be a little slower to do that. The best thing to do, I'll just mention this quick and then I'll finish up this video. The best thing to do would be to go here and copy the image and then go to somewhere called Photopea, which is like an online Photoshop. Photopea, I always call it Photopea, again with pronunciation, but it's Photopea, I believe. So I'll go to photopea.com and I already copied it. If you remember, I did copy image. And I'll go here and I'll go File, New. And when you go New, it's going to take that same size, 4000 by 2668. And I'll just hit Create. And I could even call it Summer Pick. I'll put Summer Pick. No spaces, lowercase. I don't have to put an extension, just Summer Pick. It'll actually make a PSD file, Photoshop file, but I'm not going to really use the Photoshop file. So here it is. Now it's empty. And now I'm going to paste. And I could just do Command V. I'm on a Mac. You can use Control V if you're on Windows and paste it in there. Photopea is really easy to use. Now, I don't even have to resize it now. I could go in here to Image and Image Size, and I could change it to 400 because I did have it 4000. I could do that. Or what I can do is I could just go to File, Export As, and choose JPEG because that's the best format for images. Photographic images, and I'll go here and change the size here so it'll only generate the JPEG at 400. And this will change as I click out of here. It'll make a save for web and it'll use 400. I'll usually use 80% for the quality, and that's basically compression. So the more you go down here, the more it'll compress the file. I usually leave it around 80. Compression was a big deal maybe 20 years ago or so when download speeds were really an issue, but 80% should be fine. That'll make the file nice and small without losing much quality at 80%. So what's going to happen here if I export it as a JPEG, it'll download it. So I'll just hit save. And there it is, summerpick.jpg. It's downloaded. So it's different than what's going on here. Now that's in my downloads. So I'm going to go to my downloads. Here's my downloads. There's Summerpick. And I'm going to go back to Replit, my IDE here. And again, I got to go back to my downloads. And here's Summerpick, and I'm just going to drag it in here. And that's what's nice with Replit is you could put images in here. You don't have to just link to them online like we did here. And what I'll do now is, I'll close this up down here so you don't see that. Instead of linking to the online version, what I'll do is I'll just link to this one here, which is called summerpick.jpg. So rather than linking online, I'm going to link to the local file. And in all the quotes here, I'll just put Summerpick and make sure it's spelled right. Summerpick, 2 M's, summerpick.jpg. Now, I don't have to put width 400 because I already made it 400. I made it 400 here. Now, I'm going to close this up. I don't need this anymore. But the idea is I made my own 400 pixel JPEG. and I'll get out of here. I'll have other videos on Photopea. So if that's the first time you ever used it, I'll show you more with Photopea. I'll have a whole playlist on Photopea. So I'll close that up right now, but it's a great online free application to use. And I'll get out of here. And again, this was a 4,000 pixel image. So I don't want to use a 4,000 pixel image unless, unless I have some big kind of hero image or banner image on my page. I don't need it 4,000 pixels for what I'm doing right now on my first web page. Now I'm going to refresh this. And it looks the same, but now it's using the smaller image instead of 4,000 pixel image. So it'll download a lot quicker now. And that's probably the better thing to do, is actually make your image the size you want instead of just relying on putting in an HTML attribute to do that. So now I have my image, which is actually the 400 pixel image. That's the actual size of it. And that's about it for now. So I'm doing an image. We used it in Photopea. I have a list. So that's kind of basic HTML content and structure. And again, just to go over this, everything's inside the body, which is inside the HTML tags or the HTML element. So there's the opening, closing body, and everything in here is visual. And you can see that the next level in are the H1, the H2, the paragraphs, the unordered list. Now, list items are actually a child of the unordered list. This is not, this is outside, so they're all on the same level. So this is where you start to see the descendants. So H1 are descendants of body, Li are descendants, they're like grandchildren of body because they're inside the UL or the unordered list. So we'll talk more about that, especially when we talk about the DOM, when we use JavaScript, but that's one way that we help find where these elements are. So these elements are in kind of a descendant list. So these are the first elements inside body. This is the second element inside body, and you could have elements inside of elements, and that will help us when we use CSS as well. Now, again, we didn't do any formatting right now. We just left it bare bones default vanilla HTML right now. And what we're going to do next is use some CSS to format this a little bit nicer. So instead of just putting more HTML in here, we'll start to work with CSS in our next video. So come back for that so we could start doing some CSS with this, with our bare bones HTML. And thanks for coming to Home Studio.